Hi, my name is Sam Allan. I am the writing consultant at the Donito Career Center for the Steve Hicks School of Social Work, and this workshop is all about how to write a cover letter. Cover letters can provoke some anxiety and a lot of confusion, and so we hope that this workshop will help you structure your cover letter from beginning to end and help you also to feel less intimidated by that process. This workshop is for BSWs on the job market, MSSWs on the job market, MSSWs going into final field, more on that especially at the end of the presentation, alumni and current students, so if you are an alum using this workshop years after graduating, we hope it will still be helpful to you. Social workers making a career change, which is to say that we hope these instructions will be general enough that if you are applying for a job that doesn't seem like a traditional social work job, it will still be useful toward your application and your purposes. And finally, those who like to write and those who don't. Cover letters are a really interesting form of writing, actually, because they are very formulaic, but they still ask you to preserve and express your own voice. So we'll be talking a little bit about how to strike that balance in your own cover letters and helping you feel ready for that task. Here's one way that I like to think about a cover letter, and it's to put it in context with your other application materials. Those materials are all part of what we call a marketing package. That's going to include a resume if you're applying for most jobs on the regular job market, a CV if you're applying for an academic job or for a scholarship, your LinkedIn, which isn't a necessary asset but could be useful to you, especially these days, and then any other requested materials, for example, references from a faculty panel or from a supervisor, writing samples, or anything else that shows up in that application that you're applying for. For that reason, it's important to make sure that your cover letter looks like it belongs to that marketing package. That might mean that your resume and your cover letter have the same header. It might mean that you make sure that it includes the same name. Some of us have multiple names or preferred names, and so you want to make sure that you have consistent information across both documents, even on that minor scale. And that goes for your email address and your phone number as well. Make sure that all of your contact information is consistent and updated so that your prospective employer can see it all as part of one cohesive whole. Here's the last thing I'll say about how to write the cover letter in the context of that marketing package that I think is really helpful. Think of your resume like an outline. The cover letter is sort of like the essay that you're writing around that outline, and I've included this picture of a kite because one other way you might think about it is that your resume is like the skeleton of that kite, right? It provides information to your prospective employer about who you are. It's a nice foundation for collecting data, but your cover letter helps you soar. It puts color into who you are and to what you want to say about yourself, your feelings, your passions about what you do. And for that reason, it's a little bit like making a kite. So, before you prepare to write that cover letter and construct that kite, read the job description that you're applying for closely. This is to say that you should be thinking about the cover letters, plural, that you write in terms of multiple job descriptions if you're applying for multiple jobs, and tailor each of your cover letters to that job description, right? So looking at one job description as you begin writing what you might think of as a boilerplate cover letter, think about whether your degree or area of knowledge matches the field description. Are they asking for a BSW in social work or an MSSW, and do you match that qualification? Secondly, look for whether or not the job description uses language that suggests transferable skills you could highlight from your previous experience. This is definitely a place where some close reading skills come in handy. Look for anything that the job description might be asking of you along the lines of organization, communication, community outreach, empathy, crisis intervention or mediation, anything that you might have done in a previous working experience that you think you could speak to in order to prove that you are eligible for this job, even if you haven't done anything that seems on the surface like it is comparable to what you want to do next. The third thing to think about is whether or not you hold updated certifications that match the listing's qualifications. So for example, if after you got your MSSW degree, you got an LMSW, make sure that you have that information on hand and that you would be able to provide it if somebody asked for it later. Make sure you know when you received that license and that that is listed in your cover letter and in your resume. The last thing to think about when you read this job description is whether it gives you an idea of this organization's values. Does this job posting suggest that the organization values diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example? That one will come up a lot. Does it suggest that it values integrity and a good work ethic? Does it suggest that it wants somebody who is a team player and knows how to collaborate? Look for language that suggests these values so that when you're writing your cover letter for this position, you can include some of those buzzwords in the letter. Nobody is going to think that you're pulling a fast one if you make it look intentional and if you write it sincerely. So that's sort of like doing the close reading before you write an essay, right? You might take that job description and highlight things as you're moving along, or write notes in the margins if you've got the job description out on paper. Maybe you copy and paste it into a Word document and you add track change comments. Whatever is going to help you think through the process of reading that job description before you start writing. Here's my other trick for writing cover letters and breaking it down step by step. You've reached the essay part, right? You've done your reading, you have your resume. Now you are writing around that resume, and it's a little bit like you're writing a story, but it's mostly like you're writing an argument. And you start with where you are now. That's why the first paragraph, in my opinion, is the paragraph that has to do with the present. So you start with a statement of purpose that introduces the position for which you are applying. Something like, I am writing with enthusiastic interest in the clinical intern position being offered by your organization. You then immediately highlight any degrees or special certifications that the job requires, like an LMSW or an MSSW degree. Then you write what is called an excellent fit thesis, or at least that's what I'm calling it, which includes what you may be used to writing teachers calling a thesis list. So your excellent fit statement might be something like, I believe I am an excellent fit, or I believe I am the best candidate for X position. And that thesis list is going to include a brief summary of what you are then going to talk about in the rest of the letter. And you might think about breaking it down like this. Highlight something having to do with your experience, whether you have a lot of experience or you've got a particular specialized experience that you know that this application reader is going to want to see. Highlight maybe then, after a comma, your values. These are some key words that might come up a lot in your letter and in this moment. Passion, commitment, dedication. What can you say that matches what that job posting suggested this organization valued? And lastly, if it's applicable, you might think about knowledge areas. Do you have practical knowledge from fieldwork that you've done in the past? Do you have theoretical knowledge about certain therapy interventions if you're on the clinical track, for example, or about how to do something on the macro level, right? Anything that helps to balance this thesis list and balance the cover letter so that you can prove that you are not only a well-rounded applicant, but that you are thinking deeply about all of the pieces of that ideal candidate that you hope to be. Then you're going to jump into what I'm calling the past paragraph. This is sort of like a chronological outline of everything that you think you want to elaborate upon when you explore the experiences that you've outlined a little more extensively in your resume. So think in this section, because the cover letter should only be one page in most cases, about how to remain brief and how to pick out the experiences that are A, most impressive, and B, most relevant to the position that you're applying for. You're going to use that thesis list as a guide to arrange those experiences and to think about the skills that they've helped you build, whether those are transferable skills or specialized skills. Hopefully, you are talking about a little bit of both. And use transitions to emphasize that throughout your experience, from beginning to end, you've built skills over time and you've gained insights about who you are as a social worker or as whatever it is that you want to do next, and that you know now what you want to do in that role as a result of what you've been through and as a result of what you've done. So you can go in reverse chronological order and say, my current position is working at X, Y, and Z place doing X, Y, and Z thing, and then move back in time if you want to. I recommend starting at the very beginning, whatever that beginning looks like strategically for you. It may not be the first job that you got as a high schooler when you were trying to make some money. It might be the first job that you think this prospective employer is going to want you to talk about and is going to be most interested in. So if you are applying to do something as a social worker, maybe it's the first social work relevant job you had, the first place where you gained skills as a clinical social worker, a macro level social worker, whatever it is that you do. If you transition from that first paragraph into a next paragraph discussing how you built upon the skills that you gained in experience number 1 to transition into experience number 2 and then maybe into experience number 3, you can catch your reader up to the present day and say, in my current position, I do X, Y, and Z thing. Along the way, make sure that you're emphasizing what you value about your work, what gets you excited about your work, and what you would hope to do now that you did then. Here are a couple more suggestions before we move on from this sort of loaded slide. Don't bury what you already knew. Something that I see a lot in cover letters is, in this position, I learned how to empathize with clients, or in this position, I learned how to practice treatment modalities X, Y, and Z. But sometimes in saying that, because you're being modest, right, or you want a convenient way to highlight those skills, you bury the fact that you already had them. You were probably already a very empathetic person, and that's why you went into a role that required you to be empathetic, right? So try to stay away from, in this role, I learned how to do that thing, and highlight instead a skill that you may have already had that you've honed or that you've improved in that role. Here's the last thing I'll say before we move on. The resume presents information, right? The cover letter is a great place to highlight how you feel about that information. So people will often ask how personal the cover letter can be. And in social work, this is a really interesting question, right? Because it is a discipline that's a little bit more personal and personable than certain others in other industries. So I'll say just be intentional about what you share in your cover letter. Make sure that you feel comfortable sharing information if it's personal, and make sure that it's relevant to the work that you want to do. If, for example, you want to highlight that you have direct experience in the mental health sector, both as a patient and as a practitioner, that's great. Just make sure that you feel good about that and that it highlights something about you that is strategic and that is relevant to the job that you want to do next. So, you have your present paragraph, which is like an introduction to that essay. You have your past paragraph, which is all about the experiences that you've decided are worth talking about in the constricted space that a cover letter gives you. And that could be 2 paragraphs, it could be 3 paragraphs. I think it's fine to have 1 paragraph. People then ask, what does the last paragraph look like? And that's probably the easiest part, but it's also the part that gives you the most hidden opportunities to make a great impression. This is the future paragraph. You're going to use this paragraph to write about what you hope to do if you are hired. You emphasize those shared values particularly in this paragraph. And one really great hack for doing that really well is to showcase that you did your homework. That is, you've researched the organization or the agency, and you've included something that suggests you've read their mission statement, for example. You've read whatever page pops up on their website called Values. You've looked into media coverage about the agency and what they've accomplished, if they have it. You've looked into programs that appear on the agency or organization website that you are particularly excited about. And then you sprinkle those references into that paragraph to suggest that there is a reason that you are applying for this position in this environment, and that you want to be part of that specific initiative or that specific program, whatever it is. Once you've done that, you include a thanks or a gesture of confidence, hopefully both. You might say something like, "Thank you for reading, and I look forward to hearing from you." Never say anything like, "Thank you for reading, please get back to me as soon as possible," or "I hope that I hear from you, and if I don't, it's totally okay," right? I feel like we all have that knee-jerk impulse when we send something out to people that we feel a little vulnerable about. We want to make sure they know that we don't want them to worry about us, that we know they're very busy. It's sort of the classic no worries if not. But if you stay poised, you project that confidence, and you make it clear that you are not putting extra pressure on them to respond to you, but that you do assume that they'll respond to you because you're a great applicant, you are in the clear. And that's why I think "I look forward to hearing from you" is an especially strategic statement. In this paragraph, you might also include that you will provide references or additional materials as necessary. This is a nice thing to include if the job posting that you've looked at doesn't specify that you need to include references, but it's possible that down the road, if there are multiple interviews or multiple steps toward that interview, they will ask for those materials, and putting it somewhere in your letter suggests that you're open to that and that you anticipate that process. And the last thing that you might think about doing at the bottom of your letter is including an image file with your signature in it. You don't have to do this, but it can be a really nice touch if you do have a little space at the end of the letter to use either a web service or a tablet or your cell phone even to create a handwritten signature. Most likely you'll use your finger if you're using your phone, or you'll use your mouse if you're using a web service on your computer, and then you can keep that signature file on your computer, copy and paste it into your document, make it as small or as large as you need to, adjust the contrast, and make your letter look especially professional. If you don't want to deal with all of that, that's fine. You can just sign your name. Make sure that the name that you sign matches the name at the top of the resume where you have your header and that name that you put in your resume. The next most pressing question we get about the cover letter is how to format it. So here are some things to think about. You do want to include the addressee of the letter at the top of the document in the left-hand corner. That means that you include the agency or organization name. If they've got a suite number, you put that in there, and you also include a street address. Some people say, "I don't know who is going to be reading my application. May I write to whom it may concern?" And the quick answer is yes, you can write to whom it may concern, but it's a little bit better to write something like, "Dear, insert agency name here, hiring committee." The very best thing you can do is find out who is going to be reading this application or who is the supervisor of hiring. And sometimes you can do that by calling the agency, getting a hold of an administrator and saying, "Hey, I'm applying for X position and I'm wondering who is going to be in charge of that process so that I know how to address my letter." Most likely you are going to get somebody who is not also the supervisor in charge of hiring people and who will not remember who you are and who you should not feel nervous about talking to with a question like this. If you cannot get that information, to whom it may concern or "Dear Hiring Committee" is fine. You do want to include your contact information on the cover letter. I know that this is maybe the 100th time I've said it, but you would be surprised some people do not include it, and it should match your resume. You don't want to use a difficult font, that is a font that's hard to read or inaccessible, or flashy colors. Even if you find a format that looks really nice, people do tend to prefer a really, really simple letter. You might use Word or Pages to create it and then save it as a PDF. For maximum accessibility, PDFs tend to be a really easy and secure file type to share with people that don't give you any issues. You want to make sure that you avoid tight line spacing, which is to say that if you are using single space, as you should, check to make sure that your words aren't too squished together. Some people will do that to save space on the document, and at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you make your document easy to read, not that you fit it all on one page, even if people do expect it to fit on one page. Readability is key. On the same page, you want to make sure that you avoid narrow margins. You don't want to use double space. That will severely disable you from being able to include as much information as you will hopefully want to include. And it's possible that the job description you apply for will ask you to submit more than one page. Sometimes they will give a very helpful tip that you should submit a 2-page cover letter. Sometimes, for example, if you're applying for an academic program or a scholarship, you are required or expected to submit a 2 to 3-page personal statement, which is sort of like a cover letter, but it's a little bit more expansive. And in that case, always follow the application's instructions. If you don't have that instruction, 1 page is a safe bet. Okay. If you are applying for final field, all of the rules that we just went over are going to apply, except for a few. The first most important rule is that you are submitting one letter rather than multiple letters. So unfortunately, that means that you can't customize your letter per agency that you are hoping to be placed with, but it does mean that you can then focus more on transferable skills than you might focus on specialized skills. And I'm going to put an asterisk there and say that if you are applying for a handful of possible field placements and you know that certain specialized skills are going to be relevant to all of those environments, then absolutely highlight and emphasize those specialized skills. For the most part, you're going to need to lean into your transferable skills in order to ensure that wherever you end up, your letter is convincing and compelling to that employer. So that's when you start thinking about things like organizational skills. You think about people and communication skills. Think about collaboration. Think about supervision and leadership, right? And the last thing that you're going to do in the final field letter that is different than a regular cover letter is include something called an educational learning objectives section. The educational learning objectives go at the bottom of the letter, and you're going to list maybe 4 or 5 of them, 6 if you really feel like you have a lot to say and each one is intentional and purposeful. These objectives are going to give you an opportunity to tell your employer what you hope to learn, so that the first half of the letter is about what you've already done and why you're qualified, and the second part of the letter is about how you hope this experience will push you forward on your career journey, and help you get the skills that you need to get whatever next position is your desired position afterward. So highlight objectives that you know can be met at any of the placements that you could be placed at. Include both technical and practical goals in addition to theoretical goals, by which I mean goals that involve certain actions or duties that you might be expected to perform in a given field placement, in addition to goals that have to do with knowledge areas that you want to expand or values that you hope to work out or clarify for yourself a little further. The last thing that you want to highlight, no matter what you apply for, is collaboration and an eagerness to work with your supervisor. We know that these 2 qualities matter most to most field supervisors, and that if you are able throughout the cover letter, but especially in the educational learning objectives section, to highlight that you have an interest in working with others and that you are easy to work with as somebody who will be working under a supervisor, those 2 things are going to help you most. We have tons and tons of samples related to cover letter writing, educational objective writing, etc. at the Donito Career Center Library, which is a page that you can access if you go to the Donito Career Center website. Materials that might especially help you as you are writing a cover letter or as you approach any of the tasks that were referenced in this workshop include a cover letter sample for BSW students, a different cover letter sample for MSSW students, a sample letter of interest for final field, a very lengthy list of sample educational learning objectives. I know those are especially useful to look at. And then much more. We've got resume samples for various stages in the program. We have a list of transferable skills that you're welcome to look at and think about in relation to your own experience, and other forms of correspondence that might be useful to you as you put together your application. Feel free to reach out to me at samallan@utexas.edu if you have any questions. Mind that extra A at the end of Allan. Some people forget it. This is how you can contact me if you have any questions at all about this workshop, or if you need any help writing your cover letter. You're also welcome to make an appointment with me via Steer, and we can look at your letter together. We have lots of workshops coming up this month as I record this video, but if you are watching this video years after it was made, it's probably just as likely that we have other workshops around the bend, so keep an eye on our events calendar. You should be able to access it using Steer, and we hope to see you there. Have a good rest of your day.